Good morning and welcome to Module 3, where we will begin the task of understanding work teams. So we again are building on that good solid foundation of groups and group theory as we move into this next phase of our study together. So goals for this week. We want to be able to explain the growing popularity of teams and organizations. They're becoming ever more popular. So we want to kind of explain why that is. We want to be able to contrast teams and groups and identify 4 types of teams that kind of occur within the work sphere, and particularly contrasting work groups and work teams. We want to specify the characteristics of effective teams. Those teams that are especially effective, kind of what goes into that secret sauce that results in that effective team. We want to explain how organizations can create team players, as that is essential for team functionality. And then we want to describe conditions when individuals are preferred over teams, where the team is not necessarily the best choice for the particular task at hand. So, and with those in mind, let's start with talking about why teams have become so popular in the workplace. It is true that teams have become ever more popular where there is an increasing... So we want to be able to explain why that is the case. So first and foremost, we need to think about how work teams outperform individuals on certain tasks. There are some tasks where individuals far outperform work teams, but when a task requires multiple skills, various pieces of judgment, various levels of experience, oftentimes work teams will just simply outperform an individual engaging on that task. So I'm on a work team currently that I'll talk about multiple times throughout these lessons. That includes going through and working on changing our admissions software from one company to another. There's so many factors that go into this change that need to be thought of. Things for traditional undergraduate admissions, things for adult studies admissions, things for graduate studies admissions, different pieces with the website and how things talk to one another. If one individual tried to take on this task, they would fail. There wouldn't be a way for them to do it well. But with a work team, bringing in multiple skills, multiple pieces of judgment, multiple levels of experience, we can work together and accomplish this task. Work teams also facilitate a better utilization of employee talents. You can get folks doing the right task for what their giftedness is, and keep them from doing things that maybe aren't a good use of their time. So it facilitates having each employee use their talents for the good of the organization in the most efficient way possible. Work teams are more flexible and responsive to changing events. They have an ability to pivot in a way that can be harder for individuals who aren't especially adaptable. And then work teams can be an effective way for management to democratize the organization and increase employee motivation. When employees feel like they have a voice in the organization, that is often a very good thing in terms of employee satisfaction, and creating that democratic voice in an employee in an organization can often yield really positive results. So when we're talking about work teams, how does this differentiate from the work groups that we talked about last lesson? So remember, work groups, a group is a set of 2 or more people kind of working together to achieve a certain goal. And so work groups is a set of employees that mainly interacts to share information. That's the goal of a work group, right? Where you're sharing information. So maybe people do similar job, like when I was in admissions for the School of Adult and Professional Studies, maybe I was in a group that involved various admissions folks from the various departments, and we were sharing ideas, sharing information of how we might do our job better, but we weren't collectively working towards a specific goal. So these are people that maybe have overlapping skill sets and job requirements where they where the sharing of information can be helpful in their individual work assignments. Work teams, on the other hand, are brought together strategically, and they work together consistently and for a unified purpose. They have a specific goal that's laid out that they are pursuing. Work teams, through this pursuit of one goal, often can have positive synergy that develops amongst the team, especially when it's being effective. And then the team effort results in a level of performance that is greater than the simple sum of those individual inputs, right? So from an organization standpoint, the organization can get more bang for their buck, right? They can get more output from those individual inputs by them working together than just by them all individually working on various tasks like they would in a work group. So when we compare these two, so you notice work groups are kind of all disconnected but close in proximity to one another, where work teams are all interconnected with one another. And so from a work team standpoint, when there's a goal, there is a collective performance goal where everyone's trying to work hard towards the same end. The goal of a work group is that they might just share information with one another. The synergy is neutral and sometimes can drift into negative territory if folks are adverse to sharing information with one another. That can create tension there, where the synergy in a work team, when it's operating well, is routinely positive. The accountability is all individual in a work group. Everyone's responsible for just their own individual tasks, where in work teams, there's both an individual accountability and a mutual accountability that the group itself is getting the work done. The skills that come together in a work group are random and varied. Just everyone's kind of brings their own skills, but there's no strategy put into bringing this group together. Where a work team, it's very strategic. You're thinking through who are the right people for this team and what are the right roles. How do we get the right people on the bus sitting in the right seats? So there's a complementary skill nature in work teams. There are 4 types of teams that we'll talk about in the work setting. So we've got problem-solving teams, self-managed teams, cross-functional teams, and virtual teams. So we'll spend some time through the rest of this module going through these 4 types of teams. So with problem-solving teams, these folks have a question at the core of what has brought them together. And so they're trying to solve this problem or answer this question. So they're going to share ideas, they're going to offer suggestions, they're going to look at this problem from every possible angle and then give management and decision makers the best solutions that they've come up with. Rarely are these type of teams given any authority to unilaterally implement changes or to implement their suggested actions, but rather they are trying to solve the problem in the most efficient way and then run that solution up the ladder so they can be implemented. Inherently, problem-solving teams have some limitations, right, where they have a certain limit on how much they can actually change and affect an organization. So that's where we get self-managed work teams. So self-managed work teams, typically that's 10 to 15 employees, where the team takes on a lot of the supervisory role, where they're supervising themselves. Maybe they have a team leader, but essentially they're all accountable to one another, and then the team is held accountable for the work that they are doing. So oftentimes they'll have the ability to both select and evaluate the members of the team to make sure that everyone is kind of pulling their weight. There's no social loafing happening on the team. The effectiveness of self-managed work teams it's situationally dependent. You get some self-managed work teams that perform extremely well, while others may struggle if they struggle with norms and cohesiveness and some of those other realities that we've talked about. Cross-functional teams take members from diverse areas within and between organizations where there's a hierarchical structure, and then they are able to morph from that hierarchical structure into more of the self-managed model, and then kind of be able to move back and forth. So think of your task teams or your committees, things that pull together a lot of people from various places and create this temporary team before moving back into the organization structure. So these folks will either develop new ideas or solve problems. They'll exchange information. Oftentimes they'll coordinate complex projects like what I'm doing with the software development. And then their team development may be a bit more time consuming. So it's important to kind of take note that cross-functional teams may take a little bit of time to really get going across the board. Then we've got virtual teams. We're not going to spend a ton of time talking about virtual teams because that will be our last few modules in the course as a whole. But think about it, it's using technology to bring these people together who are not physically present with one another and still allow them to be a team and interact together. So there's some challenges here, right, where there's kind of no paraverbal or nonverbal cues, harder to see hand motions. It's harder for you to see the hand motions that I'm giving as we go through this lecture. So there's limits to technology. There's limited social context, so kind of enjoying being in the presence of one another can be limited due to the virtual nature. And then there's an ability to overcome time and space constraints that makes virtual teams very positive. So even though there's some negatives, there are still some great positives to the virtual setting. Next, in our time together, we're going to talk about kind of starting to create effective teams. But let's take a quick break. Y'all get a drink of water, grab a snack, and then we'll come back together for another brief time talking about creating